period of time, even if it is several decades. But for it to be such a perfect diet, we would need to see lifetimes of it, and when we see, as in that multi-generational study, there's no one to date who has been successful from birth, or from even parents who were it, and they were in a gestational period in parents who were eating such a high quantity of fruit and then going on to eat that throughout their whole life and then living to a very old age. So that's the other issue, is the longevity aspect. There's no examples of healthy longevity in any of the fruitarians from the past. So there's these people who are public and living a couple of decades, eating a very strict way, and a strict form of fruitarianism, but they are ignorant to the fact that there are some people who have tried these diets and been totally unsuccessful with it. You often hear them making points about there's this little aspect of the lifestyle or this other tiny aspect which was the cause of their demise. However, we can't be quite so narrow-viewed about that, because diet has been so varied over time. If this was our supposedly perfect diet, it can't be so regimented to the point where you need to be eating this exact number of calories a day, you need to be doing this amount of exercise every day, this amount of getting this amount of sleep, drinking this amount of water, and doing this, that, and the other thing in a perfect way that would cause everyone to be successful on it. So when there's one person or a couple people that fall off this bandwagon and they've been doing little tiny pieces out of alignment, and they get blamed for failing because of that, that's a really unhealthy view. That's showing me that this dietary belief system is so strongly rooted and is based in dogma and becoming more of a basis for their personality than actually being something that's more of a tool for improving one's health. So yeah, there's a great number of people who have not succeeded for the long term on these diets because their bodies needed different nutrients, they had varying types of metabolism, or what could be called different constitutions. And many of these people develop very serious diseases as a result of trying to fit this paradigm. Personally, I've seen people reverse cancer on very extreme vegan diets, but I've also seen them reverse it on very high animal-based diets. I'm not advocating either for cancer. That would be something you'd want to work with a practitioner for, but it just goes to show that if one or the other extreme were exactly the way, we wouldn't see people overcoming their illness by doing the opposite. So the basic nutrient deficiencies you'll see over the long term are, of course, B12 from lack of animal products, but also things like zinc, which is very rare in fruits and vegetables, but you have to go more to the nuts and seeds, even the animal products, to get adequate amounts of zinc. And then there's, of course, iron and calcium and many of the other minerals that you hear talked about as being beneficial from animal products, but these can be taken and gotten sufficient amounts of, as we saw in the example of Dr. Curzio, when he added in more of the nuts and seeds and more of the greens to bring in the higher minerals and more variety of nutrients that help bolster these people's overall health. A common argument that fruitarians use to sort of push the fruitarian agenda is that our cells run on glucose. Well, that's true. That doesn't mean that we should bypass our body's various digestive and metabolic systems and go straight to foods that are high in glucose. Yes, it's true that we can get quick glucose and other sugars that eventually convert into glucose from fruit, and some of that's to take in is fine. However, when your whole diet's based around that, you're getting all sorts of changes in blood sugar regulation. This can be exacerbated over time, and this is shown in many individuals who have developed diabetes or other blood disorders on high fruit programs. But also you have to take into account that every animal on the planet, at least developed animal that is of a multicellular organism, runs on glucose. And so what that tells us is that any animal that has a natural diet of something other than fruit is converting those nutrients to glucose. And of course there's other fuels such as oxygen and other things that get turned into fuel for the cell. But yes, glucose is a big one. And wolves get their glucose from animal flesh. Elephants get their glucose from grasses and leaves and other greens. And same with every other animal. So what does this say about our diet? You know, like I've already mentioned, we've evolved with a very varied diet. Some fruits, of course, but not high fruit for the past many millions of years. So we've adapted to getting glucose from a wide variety of different caloric sources. So it's very much easy and beneficial for the body to take it in from fats, proteins, and other more complex sugars in some cases, as well as some simple sugars. So looking at some of the health leaders of the past who could fit into the fruitarian paradigm, even though they had different varying amounts of different types of foods as that other 25%. Some ate more fruit than others, but they all could be very clearly called fruitarian. And we'll start with one of the most controversial figures is T.C. Fry. He died at 67 of a coronary embolism. This one isn't such a good example of someone failing on a fruitarian diet because he came into it at 45, so he has a whole lifetime of issues. And then he also didn't completely follow the natural hygiene approach because he was traveling and so exuberant about the diet that he developed some small habits like not sleeping 10 hours a day or 8 hours a day or 7 hours a day. He was at times sleeping a little bit less, and some people say he was also consuming some processed foods. But to be honest, and to be pretty critical thinking here, if we look at his diet, for the most part, it was still the natural hygiene approach, and he was eating very large amounts of fruit. So if his diet was the perfect diet for humans, it would make up for a lot of these issues. Whereas we see many examples around us of people burning the candle at both ends, but still doing all right because they're consuming some adaptogenic herbs, or they're doing some other things in their lifestyle that make up for this bad habits. Although I wouldn't recommend making your lifestyle based around bad habits and just taking things to offset their health problems that they create. Someone dying at 67 is not a good example for a health advocate, even if they did come from a place of ill health before. So this is definitely a very good example of someone failing on the fruitarian diet, a primarily raw food, high fruit diet. Another example of someone failing on the fruitarian diet is Morris Kroc, who died of leg cancer. And he was a marathon runner, so it's interesting that that was the body part of his body's choice that would be his demise. And he was, unlike the previous person I just mentioned, he was much more focused and disciplined about his diet and whole lifestyle. He was getting a proper amount of sleep, etc. So with him, there's not much else that people can blame to try and offset the problems that this diet created for him in the long run. Next we have Johnny Love Wisdom, who died at 81, which, you know, that's getting a little bit up there in terms of being a healthier lifespan. And of course these people were from the past, and lifespan over the last 200 years has been increasing in humans in Western cultures. So we got to give them that. However, these people were talking about health, and they were saying their diet is the best ever. And it actually didn't end up being all that different from the people around them in terms of what they ended up getting out of the length of the lifespan. Plus they also had a slow decline of their health along with that for the years preceding their death. So Johnny Love Wisdom's another example of someone that had sort of this long, slow decline leading up to his death at 81. He was racked by blindness, sort of different amounts and varying degrees of paralysis. And these are very characteristic of B12 deficiency, even though some people try to write this off as sort of the toxins from his time as a youth working in orchards in California, where he was exposed to some chemical toxins. But really, that's like a whole life's worth of time that he had to detox these things on supposedly the best detoxing diet ever. But really, it was definitely a B12 deficiency and probably other deficiencies with that, probably essential fatty acid deficiencies, which can result in the neurological problems and the eye problems, as we all know. Because those are areas of our body that require essential fatty acids for the myelin sheath for the structure of the eye, and these would be things that would become deficient in the long run. There was someone less of a well-known icon as a health teacher, but someone within the natural hygiene paradigm died at 28 of osteoporosis. This is really serious. And she was, I believe, Miss Natural Hygiene many years ago, and that was when the magazine was out promoting their dietary philosophy. And one year she was Miss Natural Hygiene, and she died a year later. And she had become totally pale and basically bedridden, and she died, which was a complete shock to the community at the time, but it wasn't too well known because she wasn't such a big figure. But this is just an example of someone failing big time on the fruitarian diet. And she definitely was following it to a T. She wasn't, again, like T.C. Fry, having sort of this slightly reckless lifestyle. The next person is Walter Sigmeister, who, another big fruitarian, natural hygiene, that's whole paradigm proponent and health lecturer, and he died at 64 of pneumonia. And finally we come to the sort of father of natural hygiene itself, at least the one who really brought the community together and made a name for itself in the early to mid to even later 1900s, is Herbert Shelton, who did live to 90, which is, I gotta hand it to him, that's pretty good by the standards of the past century. However, for the last 13 years of his life he was bedridden, and it was a gradual decline, and even before he was bedridden it was a gradual decline, and people were always shocked when they came to meet this sort of god of fruitarianism that he was in such an ill state of health. That really was a slow gradual decline, which is probably the worst way to go, but it's not really good in terms of promoting the long-term health benefits of diet to have someone going on in that way. So the reason for that slow gradual decline was sort of like a Parkinson's-like degenerative neurological disorder, which again, that screams B12 issues, essential fatty acid issues, dopamine issues, and all these other things that can be ameliorated through adding some even vegetarian animal products, if you're inclined, so flesh products, adding more nuts and seeds, adding more greens, just generally not being so boxed in and closed and narrow-minded in terms of eating just from this really sort of small food group that's available from the right diverse amount of foods that humans have adapted to on the planet today. There's a few other sort of figures within fruitarianism who died of strange causes, like Arnold Ehret, who slipped and hit his head and died, sort of similar in a way to, reminds me of the famous Dr. Atkins, who slipped and fell and hit his head on ice. Who's to say why these two figures actually slipped and fell? I know with Dr. Atkins he was overweight. And that's sort of the other extreme of the dietary world, but just focusing on Dr. Ehret, there's different people to say why that happened, but it was nighttime, it was probably foggy, it might have been slippery. Could have been a complete fluke. It could also be a degeneration in his coordination and neurological health. I'm not going to make any statements about that, it's just a possibility. And that's just, again, these are the main figures within the fruitarian movement from the history, and we're going to see, as things unfold over the coming decades, what happens to some of the prominent leaders that are out there speaking publicly at this time. So with that, I'm going to say take care, get tested for everything from hormones to vitamins to minerals, overall blood profile health, and continue that for the long term. And, you know, be open to other paradigms of health and embrace life without limits.